Intro one.
You know what your face looks like. You know where you live.
This has been a long con. I don't know. Stick you with the burden of the podcast and then peace out.
Yeah. Eventually it'll be like kind of a Jon Stewart arrangement where, or maybe a Tucker Carlson, update it a little bit. Why did Marx invent the symptom? And how did he do it?
And we appear to have chosen quite a difficult subject for ourselves again, Michael.
Yeah, who fucked that up?
So fuck you on that one.
I apologize sincerely, but here we are.
I felt confident the first 5 pages, and then when I ran in, especially the last 3 pages, I was like, Jesus fucking Christ.
Yeah, it gets way too hectic.
Well, he's like, it's hilarious because he's talking about like 5 or 6 things at the same time.
Yeah. Yeah, I thought it was going to be an easy one. And I've read this like 3 times in the last 2 years or whatever.
Same.
Yeah, me too. Yeah. This is probably the 3rd or 4th time I read it. I mean, he comes right out of the gate, right? This is his first book.
Yeah. Also, so Michael, though, tell me how is it possible for Marx in his analysis of the world of commodities to produce a notion which applies also to the analysis of dreams, hysterical phenomena, and so on?
Oh, sorry, me?
Yeah.
Well, Peter, you'll find that there's a formal homology between your interpretive procedures.
I think you were saying that it was none other than Karl Marx who invented the notion of the symptom in his declining thesis, just the sally of wit, a vague analogy, or does it possess a pertinent theoretical formulation? You were saying before.
I hate this.
Yeah.
Right after we were being like, I think we quoted too much.
Wait, I think you said if Marx really articulated the notion of the symptom as it was also at work in the Freudian field, then we must ask ourselves the Kantian question concerning the epistemological notions of the conditions of possibility of such an encounter.
I was trying to emphasize the Kantian question of the epistemological
conditions of possibility.
Yeah,
You did say that.
I was pointing that out. Well, what he's getting at with the comparison between Freud and Marx is that each presents an interpretive mode of looking at manifest content as it seems to relate to the latent thought, which in the commodity is yes, a equivalency between values. But there's a kind of third layer that he's trying to get that Žižek is trying to point out that is the kind of real secret of the form itself. That is the secret of the third layer is the form itself, in the way that the form falls into the content of the dream, or of the commodity form.
Yeah, like what in Marx he opens. Okay, we'll open the episode. Žižek and so on. I think it's exclusive patron content. You got Michael, Will, and Peter, and we're talking about the opening chapter, the sublime objective ideology, which we all know about, and we don't have to really get into.
Žižek's seminal 1989 work. Of course, the first and groundbreaking iteration of Žižek's idiosyncratic and peculiar method of hybridizing Lacan, Marx, and Hegel.
I think, Michael, you were saying the other day that Žižek is a thinker who regards nothing as outside its field. The result is deeply interesting and provocative. I think you said that the other day.
That's true.
And to which I said, he's truly the Elvis of cultural theory.
Maybe he's like the Elvis of cultural theory because the thing that was so perplexing to the parents of that era, whose children were listening to Elvis, was that Elvis shook his hips around. Elvis the pelvis, they called him.
Mhm.
There was this very like sexual aspect to Elvis's performance, and of course with Žižek, the truly disconcerting thing about Žižek's performance is his sniffles and his tugging at his t-shirt. It's the thing that stands in for the trauma of the thing.
Yeah, right.
We have in the opening chapter to Sublime Object the first use of Žižek's and so on.
Oh, really? I didn't pick up on that.
He says that. Yeah, no, that was what Michael said earlier. But I guess you might have been referencing Žižek at that point, Michael. When you said to produce a notion which applies also to the analysis of dreams, hysterical phenomena, and so on. Wait, you got to watch your mic because it's rubbing against your shirt.
Yeah, just for everyone, so everyone knows. I don't know what the quality of this is. It wasn't terrible last time, but
No, it wasn't.
My microphone is broken, so I'm using my headphone microphones.
Jake's gone back to whatever the fuck he's doing when he's not doing this.
So what Žižek is trying to set up at the beginning of this is that like in interpreting the political economy, like interpreting dreams, there tends to be a fetishistic fascination of the content supposedly hidden behind the form.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
And it's interesting. First, he explains what's going on with Marx by way of exampling Freud and dreams, and then he explains Freud by going into the commodity form.
Yeah.
And they each kind of like when I read this, I'm like, as soon as I start to not really get what he's talking about with Freud, he clearly clarifies it with Marx.
Uh-huh.
But yeah, he's like, there's something at work in both Marx and Freud where we tend to look at where in the kind of normal functioning of ideology or of our ego, or of our approach to understanding dreams or commodities or whatever,
or a social reality.
Yeah, we tend to look at like what's evident, what the content of those things is. Like
Yeah.
if I was just talking about my dream earlier, and your eyes glazed over, but because the content wasn't really that interesting. Really, to be fair, and but yeah, both what Freud and earlier Marx was doing was that what appears first as the most evident thing about a commodity or a dream is actually beside the point of how we can understand these phenomena. It's not really what.
Yeah, like it. There's a further element to it which Žižek is trying to point to, where it's about the kind of like movement of the form itself, right? And I think he doesn't really. Actually, I don't know if he mentions Hegel at all in this opening chapter.
No, he kind of vaguely references him, but not really.
But this is a Hegelian point, right? That the truth of the species is, or the genus rather, is expressed through a member of its species.
As an exception.
Yeah. He says like if we seek the meaning of the dream in the latent content, hidden by the manifest text, we're doomed to disappoint. All we find is something entirely normal, albeit usually unpleasant. The nature of which is mostly non-sexual, or definitely not unconscious. So like, if we are obsessed with the kind of content of the dream and then say like, oh, this content means that, that's not really what's interesting to Žižek about the analysis of dreams.
Nor is it the latent dream thought either. Right? Like,
no, it's how the unconscious attaches itself. I think he uses the word intercalate. It's between the latent content and manifest content. The way that an unconscious desire articulates itself through the form of the dream.
It's between a chicken and a goose. It's intercalated. Sorry.
I think you should leave that on the back seat of the car to cook.
Okay, that's definitely gonna. But yeah, he calls it the dream work. Like, why is it a dream at all? Right? Like,
Right.
not necessarily what the content of it is, but why has both the content and the latent dream thought been manifested as a dream at all? Like, what is the point of that being a dream?
Right, which is, as you just said, the dream, the work, the dream. What is it? The dream work? Yeah, DreamWorks. Hey, actually,
This theme park I've
great
been
name
to.
for
DreamWorks is a good name, man. Well, again, referencing the Monsters Inc. example you had there, Michael.
Yeah,
Indeed.
Right, that's
It's back.
Pixar, but yeah.
But actually, that's like, I think that like pretty solidly, like conforms to what we're talking about here.
Yeah, it's true. Yeah,
Like in that understanding of the dream, like the nightmare, like the content of the nightmare doesn't really matter, and nor would the meaning of
it's about the surplus extracted through the
fact that it's a dream at all, and that nightmares are more productive than, or at that point
like an extra
later
layer
on,
of
yeah,
productivity of the dream that actually is a source of energy.
yeah. Interesting, also that it's a direct commodity.
Yeah,
in Monsters Inc. Yeah,
it's really nice. Yeah.
Any other favorite childhood movies that we should talk about by way of using up time?
Jumanji, Hook.
Hook.
Hook. Oh yeah, Jumanji actually was too much of a nightmare for me. I was kind of scared of that movie.
Mm-hmm.
It is scary.
Yeah,
but I think also in trying to understand Freud's interpretation of dreams, the role of the unconscious can be difficult to parse.
mm-hmm.
Žižek's pointing out here that there's nothing particularly unconscious in the latent dream thought, that it's actually can be articulated in the syntax of everyday common language, and this is why I think Lacan says that the unconscious speaks. Like it's there fully, in a sense, on the surface,
Mm-hmm.
but it's kind of it's disavowed, I suppose, or rather the unconscious kernel is kind of expressed in the form of content. Yeah, the essential constitution of the dream is thus not its latent content, but the work, which confers on it the form of a dream. Herein then lies the basic misunderstanding. If we seek the secret of the dream in the latent content hidden by the manifest text, we are doomed to disappointment. All we find is some entirely normal, albeit usually unpleasant thought, the nature of which is mostly non-sexual and definitely not unconscious.
I did already say that quote, but
okay, yeah,
but
it's a good quote.
That's good too.
It hits. Like the latent thought, the latent thought of the dream. Žižek points out that there's a kind of short circuit here between the latent thought expressed in the dream and a really repressed desire, a desire which is not at all associated with the latent thought, but is the kind of real repressed desire of the dream.
Yeah, so he kind of sums all this up. He says, well, Michael, I think you might have mentioned this, but at bottom, dreams are nothing other than the particular form of thinking, made possible by the conditions of the state of sleep. It is a dream work which creates that form, and it alone is the essence of dreaming, the explanation of its peculiar nature. So like, what's weird about a dream is that it's a dream at all, not necessarily the content of the dream. And I think that's basically what he's getting at.
Yeah,
and then but it's still a bit hard to get. Like, how is dream work, right? How is dreaming work? Or like, how is it constituted? And then this is when he brings Marx and his description of the commodity form into the mix.
It's about the thing that makes it sort of like meaningful to associate with Marx is in terms of a hermeneutical approach, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like the dream can be actually interpreted and read
as a kind of message,
on a level of abstraction that is distinct from either the idea that it's expressing some unconscious desire, or that it's a dream with in which certain things happen that may or may not be meaningful to interpret,
mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah,
that is the method. The hermeneutical approach itself is the kind of thing that he's emphasizing here.
That, as well as like how the content of the dream is manifested by the form itself.
Yeah,
those two things he sees in Marx, like already at work in Marx.
Yeah.
Where he writes,
it's like the meaning seemingly hidden behind the dream is actually, in a sense, kind of put there by the interpretation of it. Like, that is to say, like, it's not actually behind the meaning or under the apparent content of the dream. The thing that makes it interesting to look at all is that
then Marx opens Capital with exampling the commodity and says, like, it seems like it's just like a thing that you trade, that there's something inherent in the quality of the commodity that is equal to something else.
Yeah.
It's so let me get that Marx thing going just a sec.
So just to set it up a bit, Pete. So it's like the difference between Žižek setting up the political economy and the libidinal economy.
Yeah.
Between Marx and Freud. Mm-hmm. So there's no secret behind, within, or beneath the form. The secret is the form itself. Yeah. So, like, why have latent dream thoughts assume such a form? Why are they transposed into the form of a dream? As well as why has work assumed the form of the value of a commodity? And why can it affirm its social character only in the commodity form?
Right. Yeah. It's not merely what does the dream say, or what does the content say, or what does the commodity form say. It's why is it expressed in this way to begin with?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, Marx, simply put, it's basically just what I said earlier. He says the commodity is, first of all, an external object, a thing which through its qualities satisfies human needs of whatever kind. But, like, that it's what it appears as. But what Žižek is pointing to and what Marx explains is that there's actually far more at work in a commodity rather than the content of those satisfaction of needs, right?
Right.
Like, whereas a dream first appears to be its content, it in fact includes all these other things around it. So, like, that dual movement, the hermeneutical approach, as well as getting rid of the fascination of the kind of like signification of dreams and more towards an emphasis on dream work. It's reminiscent of two stages with Marx that Žižek is pointing to in his analysis of the secret of the commodity form. First, Žižek writes, we must break the appearance according to which the value of a commodity depends on pure hazard, on an accidental interplay between supply and demand, for example. We must accomplish the crucial step of conceiving the hidden meaning behind the commodity form, the signification expressed by this form. We must penetrate the secret value of commodities. So, like, the value isn't merely like its kind of usefulness.
Yeah, it's use value.
Yeah. But value, and this is also what Marx says, but like, value is something other than use. It kind of exists in this kind of abstract sense.
Yeah.
Value is abstract, even though, as many materialists, traditional Marxists would have it, value is not an abstract force because
it's labor time.
Yeah.
Yeah. But he does emphasize that, in exchange value, which is another term here, Žižek is emphasizing that the commodity its value can be abstracted from it in the form, in the medium or mode of exchange, so that, like, it's not just that the commodity is representative of its conditions of creation in terms of the labor time represents or its use value, but in the act of its exchange away from these concrete characteristics, there is also a kind of abstraction in the sense of its being the same value as the thing for which it is exchanged.
Yeah, like, how is it possible that these two different objects, these two different things, can be equivalent, right? Like, what is at work there? What kind of abstract force is at work there? Because one thing does not equal another in any other sense than as an abstraction. Yeah. You have to be able to abstract to understand those things as equating one another. And I think
Žižek very cleverly points out how this actually presages the mode of abstraction that the natural sciences attempts to interpret, like in various disciplines, like in physics or in the natural sciences. In the natural sciences, there's a search for the determining quantities by which nature expresses itself, irrespective of their specific qualitative iterations. This is also expressed in the commodity form, where I'm quoting Žižek here. The commodity form is at work in money, that commodity which renders possible the commensurability of the value of all other commodities, notwithstanding their particular qualitative determinations.
Yeah, so money is what levels these commodities amongst each other, right? Like what makes them be able to be equivalent to one another.
Yeah.
But
or in the words of Philomena Kunk, money is the best way we have for telling how much money we've got.
So what is money? Put simply, money is the best way we have of telling how much money you've got.
Yeah. But anyway, like I think just to touch on Marx, it's like the commodity is first of all an object, a thing which through its qualities satisfies human needs of whatever kind. But I think if you put the kind of psychoanalytic twist on like on an object and a thing, as you know, in a way that he probably obviously did not mean it, but I think kind of gets you to thinking about the commodity as well. I mean, Žižek outright says that money is a sublime object.
Yeah, he does say
in this
that.
chapter. Yeah.
Yep.
Well,
he's pointing out that these levels of abstraction of these things rely on what he calls another scene, the abstraction that occurs through the frame supported by the transcendental subject. And that's key here. Like the thing that he's saying, his comment on science there is that in the scientific method is the disavowed role of the transcendental subject. That frame in which qualities and quantities can assume an abstract value and an equivalent value, an equivalent interpretative frame. I'm not sure if I've ever really seen this. I'm sure there is something, just a whole field of description on this. But value is like a Hegelian like triad. There's exchange and use, and then value as such. Which is only expressed through those things, but is nonetheless different than them. Well, is value as such money?
Money, but not a particular type of money, right? Because, there's only ever like dollars or yen or euros or whatever, but there is money as such, which is only ever manifested as like a particular form of money.
Right.
Anyway,
but the thing that also Žižek is doing here is showing that like social forms can be explained in the same terms as we understand psychical forms, right? And from what I can understand, this is kind of an innovation. I think that there were like psychoanalytic Marxists before this, but I know that there were, but from what I've heard Todd, for example, say that there is something novel in this application of psychoanalytic reading of social forms that Žižek is doing here.
Yeah.
Well, it's interesting. He's also building off Alfred Son Rethel. How do you say that guy's name?
Yeah, that guy seems cool. He's quoting him a lot.
Yeah, it seems like this basic point that we're making here about the kind of structure of the commodity form being evident or suggestive of the transcendental subject is a point that Žižek is getting from this fellow here.
And this is an interesting point that like the abstraction is not occurring solely within that, or the interpretive mode or hermeneutical mode is not occurring within a subject, right? Because it can be exchanged. This is the thing that makes it essential to its functioning, is that it is exchanged between subjects. There's an intersubjective.
Yeah. Is he saying that the abstraction that's required for the exchange of commodities needs to be also the explanation for us as subjects? Because in order to think, like thinking is a kind of form of exchange, and like subjectivity itself is a form of exchange. And that what we are as subjects is something that is like something that is constituted by something outside of us.
Yeah, it's also
a form of exchange.
Right. Yeah. You can read the exchange here as the universal medium through which particulars are expressed.
Yeah, and like if you think about it, like an object like is not inherently a commodity, right? Like it's commodity insofar as it's able to be exchanged. I.e., it's like identity as a commodity exists beyond the specifics of the form itself, as we were saying with Freud.
Right, and so too with this kind of like, Žižek is also setting up here a like a way of interpreting reality itself, I think, too, or like a comment
Yeah.
on social reality itself, because like yes, reality in a sense is determined by our own particular experience of it, the welter of our impressions, of our sensory impressions, for instance. This is not what he says, but I think you can say this. But like he makes an interesting point here that if we focus too closely on the kind of abstractions of reality, we miss that the abstractions themselves have a kind of reality where we act as if
Mm-hmm.
the abstraction is in itself a real thing. So like
Yeah.
money is an example of this. But like we don't get closer to reality by saying, oh, all of these things are just made up, which is kind of like that that I think is the folly of a lot of like social construction theories, and also just like of the kind of typical like the non
Money isn't real.
example of this too. Like,
And also people saying like, oh, money isn't real. Like, so then it's like, well, its effects are quite real. So
yeah,
that's
so
a
like
version of describing it as reality.
exactly.
Yeah,
Like,
and that's why Žižek gets into like the materiality of belief.
Exactly.
Well, yeah, just to reframe that point you made, is like there is a reality of an illusion, and this is kind of like his first description of ideology in the book. But like an illusion that functions socially, but like kind of depends on people not being particularly aware of it, and but is nonetheless real.
And like even if you are aware of it, like in the dream, aware of the manifest content, that doesn't particularly gain. It does not allow access necessarily in itself to understanding like the form itself. And I think that this is where a lot of people go wrong. Like I was just trying to say, like a person who has become convinced that they can see through the layers of false reality of the everyday. I mean, you could say conspiracy theorists, but I think this extends to just how a lot of people relate to reality. They say, like, oh, don't you realize that none of this is real? This is just a fiction. I think for one thing that leads to psychosis, but that's beside the point. But like, Žižek says here that if we come to know too much to pierce the true functioning of social reality, this reality would dissolve itself. That is, like, it's not like, yes, reality is a fiction, and that's what Lacan says, but that doesn't make it not real or not effective, and it doesn't make it doesn't mean that it doesn't act actually. It's that it's not actually existing. So, which is to say, the abstraction is also real.
Yeah, what? And then he describes like what is real in the abstraction.
Well, this is where we reach the dimension of the symptom, as Žižek says.
Right.
Well, sorry, just to land that point about abstraction and money, etc. Like what? Like, say you have tarnished money, ripped money, it's still worth just as much as a perfectly like new version of itself. Therefore, like it's money. Like the money is something other than the physical form in which you're holding. In that, there's a kind of like, okay, this is actually pretty cool what he says. He says, this immaterial corporality, the body within the body, gives us a precise definition of the sublime object. This is actually good because it does it for us. And is in the sense that the psychoanalytic notion of money as a prephallic anal object is acceptable, provided that we do not forget how this postulated existence of the sublime body depends on the symbolic order. The indestructible body within the body, exempted from the effects of wear and tear, is always sustained by the guarantee of some symbolic authority. So, like, yeah, money is guaranteed by something external, the symbolic order.
Right.
Just as
hence the insignia on a coin.
The guarantor of its worth. Yeah.
And hence he also draws a comparison here between that and and a king. Like a king, yes, is someone who thinks he's a king, but is also someone who's treated like a king.
Okay, then he makes the move into what you were saying about the symptom, right? Well, symbolic order is also like a continuation of what we were saying in terms of like you as a subject exist within the symbolic order, right? Like you don't exist like kind of separately and cohesively beyond it, but only.
Well, it's like if you had your own kind of money, no one would recognize it as money. So it wouldn't be money.
when I was a kid, at a novelty store, I bought what looked like initially to be like fake American money, which I thought was fun and a real laugh. And then when I brought it home, I was shocked and disturbed to find that there were penises all over it. It was like really traumatic event at the time. I was like really upset that there were penises all over it. So instead of it was actually a post-phallic object, not a pre-phallic one.
Okay, so I think also there's a point here to be made vis-a-vis like social existence of the social reality of symbols, or is that like they don't particularly rely on subjects or individuals being knowing that they're abstractions. They act anyway, and that is that's what Žižek calls ideology. So, like spinning off of that, the non-knowledge on the part of the subject, this is the dimension of the symptom. Because one of its possible definitions, Žižek says, would be a formation whose very consistency implies a certain non-knowledge on the part of the subject. Subject can enjoy his symptom only insofar as it's... Fuck, I forgot. I didn't post the rest of that quote.
I gotta wait.
I know the one as well.
Yeah. Let me step in here for a second. The subject can enjoy his symptom only insofar as its logic escapes him. The measure of the success of its interpretation is precisely its dissolution. I'm not sure he would still agree with that last statement there.
Say it again.
To repeat, he says, the subject can enjoy his symptom only insofar as its logic escapes him, which is what you were saying. And then the measure of the success of its interpretation, the symptom's interpretation, is precisely its dissolution. Is there really a dissolution exactly of the symptom? Like ultimately?
No, I think it would be preserved somehow.
I mean, I think it's like we were saying with like the death drive, for instance. There's not like an end to the death drive.
No, because that dissolution bit I was thinking about before, but I couldn't finish the thought when I was reading it. But it made sense to me when I was reading. I'm just trying to think it through.
Like it almost seems like he's saying there that you can come to the end of like traversing the fantasy would be like kind of reaching the end of the treatment and being kind of like without symptoms.
I thought it had more to do with how abstraction itself is unconscious. Like it's the transcendental framework.
Oh, that's a general point he's making beforehand. Agreed. It's a bit beside the point, but yeah, I read that last bit and I was like, that seems like something he wouldn't necessarily write now. The measure of the success of its interpretation is precisely its dissolution.
I know our good friend Rex Butler does a comparison essay with Sublime Object and Parallax View on Žižek's changing position.
Interesting.
Do you remember what he says?
I know, I just downloaded it for this episode.
So everyone, Michael will get back to us on what he's downloaded.
Yeah, very helpful.
Yeah.
But there's
right now your computer is learning it for you. It's like it exists.
Yay.
It's an external. It's enjoying the text for you.
Okay, but then he says that the symptom sort of paves the way for finding the crack in the totality of the system. Yeah, sure. Yeah, okay. So he says like, okay, what then is the Marxian symptom? Like, if Marx invented the symptom, what is it? And it's the way in which, just like you were saying, the kind of like asymmetry and imbalance of the system like undermines its universal sense of itself. So like the example he gives is freedom. So like in the kind of what Marx describes as bourgeois freedom, for instance, the freedom to buy, the kind of individual rights is undermined and relies on, just like you said, one's freedom, quote unquote, to sell their labor, in that they're free to enslave themselves to capital. And this, for Marx, shows the limits of bourgeois freedom, in that it shows the unfreedom of that type of freedom. Exactly.
Yeah.
Freedom
and it's the exception. Sorry, Pete, go.
Oh, I was just going to there is the kind of universal notion of freedom, but it's only that relies on the kind of implicit unfreedom of the system.
Yeah, so it's sustained by that exception, right? So like the idea is that in Marx's inventing of the symptom, according to Lacan, it's the idea that he's highlighted a particular species of the genus of freedom.
Right.
So it's you're free to sell your labor, but of course, therein lies the rub.
Yeah, Žižek says by selling his labor freely, the worker loses his freedom. The real content of this free act of sale is the worker's enslavement to capital.
Yeah, that sucks.
Yeah,
can't confirm it sucks.
Yeah, murder is a crime unless it's in self-defense, etc. All systems have this point of exception.
Oh yeah, that's interesting. Like, yeah, and Žižek also goes on to say that the emergence of this new commodity of labor as a commodity is the internal negation of the universal principle of equivalent exchange of commodities. In other words, it brings about a symptom. It instantiates a kind of negativity into the terrain of supposed bourgeois
universality
of the individual.
I'm straight until I have a really gay dream.
Or it's like I'm a chicken until I have an egg dream, you know. So yeah, the idea is that like Marx detects a contradictory element, right? That undermines this form, and so the ideological critique that's accomplished is like that's the symptom grounds and ungrounds the subject, right?
Exactly. So it's not just that the relations between men are replaced by relations between things, which is to say that men or workers become things. There's a further element here that relation introduces a different element into the mix, where it appears as an immediate property of the relation, but the property itself belongs to a kind of outside of that relation. It implies, for instance, it says something about the universal form of freedom and not just the material form of freedom between subjects.
Wait,
like that workers are in their apparent freedom of their ability to sell their labor and even to be in their abstraction the same as other workers. This
because of wage labor. Yeah.
Exactly. This also, like, you know, as Marx says, this is also a form of unfreedom, but it also introduces into the category, the form of freedom itself. It's on the breakdown of freedom,
as well as like
that's the stage for a total reformulation of the notion of freedom. Let's say in the Marxist sense, where people
in the utopian sense, perhaps.
Oh, in the utopian sense, there's that, but also I think in the Marxist sense of like acknowledging that terrain of unfreedom as the terrain to be kind of like emphasized and worked through, and like you stake your claim to the common unfreedom of workers like you in the name of establishing a different, more universal form of freedom.
And maybe just what we were saying earlier with like the kind of interpreting symptoms leads to its dissolution. There isn't like it's not that this understanding of this process leads to freedom in the Marxian sense, nor and this is Žižek's kind of problem with Marx and his utopianism, is that there's not going to be an end to like the contradictions of being alive, right? Like they exist in different forms under a different economic system. But yeah, also what he's pointing to, like, and what you suggested in terms of like where through wages and through labor, the worker becomes a commodity, right? Labor becomes a commodity, but there's also surplus value. And I think he's also going to make the link, Žižek, between surplus value and surplus enjoyment in this book,
Right.
I think.
Yeah, he does. Yep.
Yeah.
So like, yeah, there is through the symptoms, there is a kind of level of, there's an add-on. There's like something that develops through the kind of normal process of this system of, be it psychically or economically, that produces a kind of surplus that is something other than merely like kind of the smooth functioning of the system.
Yeah, and it also produces a subjectivity that can become hystericized. So like, why is this freedom not freedom? Like, how am I as a worker who's allegedly free in my ability to sell my labor for an apparently fair exchange? Žižek says here, instead of appearing at all events as their own mutual relations, the social relations between individuals are disguised under the shape of social relations between things. Here we have a precise definition of the hysterical symptom of the hysteria of conversion proper to capitalism. That like the subject of this social arrangement, I think through the logic of the social arrangement, can be sort of shot out the other end and made the contradiction to the notion of the social arrangement.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, the proletariat is could we say it's the symptom of the capitalist system?
Yeah, and but it also is the point at which the subjectivity can, or the point at which the system can be hystericized. Why is the proletariat, in a sense, kind of doomed here to only serve the capitalist class? Like, the proletariat become the gravediggers of capitalism. It's like the proletariat doesn't exist before capitalism exists.
Mm-hmm.
Proletariat exists as a result of the capitalist dynamics, but then also functions as the contradiction to it.
Yeah, but so like that link between symptoms and commodities. So it's in the interpretation of a symptom in psychoanalysis, or the interpretation of a commodity in Marx, that you can only enjoy a symptom or enjoy a commodity through the interpretation of a symptom or a commodity. You lose your enjoyment. So say, for example, in a commodity with, say, an iPhone or whatever, if you're wholly conscious of everything that's involved in its production, your enjoyment is removed, dissolved.
Though often, like, that awareness stands in for doing anything about the functioning as itself, right? Like,
that produces
enough
cynicism,
to know.
right?
Yeah, it's enough to know, like, oh, yes, people at the Apple company are throwing themselves off a roof, but that knowledge is taken kind of just like it's as itself some sort of political standpoint or whatever.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
and so that's when you get back into materiality of belief. So it doesn't matter whether you are consciously involved in that process or not. It's your actions that belie your unconscious belief. And that's when we get back to this idea of like this hermeneutic or interpretive model. It reveals this unconscious relationship. That's what this abstraction stuff's all about.
Mm-hmm. And then just to focus on the abstraction notion again, like Žižek calls it scandal, right? That and a kind of threat to philosophy, that something like knowledge of this kind of thing, something like knowledge, an awareness of abstraction, is only a result of exchange, or not only, is primarily, or at least initially, the result of exchange. Something that exists beyond the interpretive, the act of interpretation. So like the threat, I guess, being, he only really implies it, but I guess the threat to philosophy then as an attempt to, I don't know, understand the world in some basic sense, itself is a kind of manifestation of a process of exchange beyond itself. Is that what he was saying?
That sounds interesting. I'm not quite sure what you mean, but I just think
I thought it was that it dissolves philosophy itself.
In what sense?
So like,
well, it is actually.
No.
That's what Hegel is doing, right? Like Hegel's style of philosophy is not just about expounding certain principles. It's about showing how the subject, in a sense, kind of exists already philosophically, already phenomenologically in Hegel's sense, despite whatever content fills that subjective mode of understanding. See what I mean?
Yeah. And the idea would be that like the subject relies on its symptoms to constitute its identity. You remove the symptom, you remove the subject.
Right.
Yeah. I think this goes back to why Žižek thinks that psychoanalysis needs to be kind of added to philosophy, at least at this point, because it helps explain that something like knowledge, the knowledge of philosophy, is also reliant on this kind of network of unconscious, and it's not on the level of awareness that a lot of the kind of truths of the world function.
Yeah, so it's like a lot of people, one of the conventional ways of understanding our social situation. One of the ways of understanding our social dynamics, our social reality, in whatever form, like let's say either in history or in sort of a political framing, like MSNBC style political framing of a specific moment, might be able to interpret it based on the expressed content of whatever is under discussion, but misses this extra third layer, which is to say that it's not merely what does the content say, it's latent thought, but why is it expressed in this way to begin with?
Mm-hmm. Well put.
In terms of the interpretive mode Žižek is trying to sort of get to here, he's saying that this kind of like emphasis on what he's calling the third layer, I think you could say the third pill even, quoting here, offers us a kind of matrix enabling us to generate all other forms of fetishistic inversion. It is as if the dialectics of the commodity form presents us with a pure, distilled, so to speak, version of a mechanism offering us a key to the theoretical understanding of phenomena, which, at first sight, have nothing whatsoever to do with the field of political economy.
And from the Marx's, like once you think that it doesn't have, like once you discuss this understanding of the symptom, it also initially doesn't appear to have anything to do with the unconscious.
Right.
But he's saying that
it kind of reformulates the field.
Yeah.
Like that, and in terms of the dream, it's like it's not just a discussion of the manifest content or the latent thought, right?
Mm-hmm.
That third layer, that third pill, is like the thing that, I think it's really just like the terrain of theory, right?
Yeah, there's no neutral field upon which to just like discuss these phenomena, right? Like because the very discussion itself is already a particular framing of it.
Exactly.
So
and that's Žižek's point about science too. It's like
Yeah.
this is not just a neutral explanation of the natural world. It relies, for one thing, on the category of the subject interpreting it.
Mm-hmm. And I guess what the point of him emphasizing this is to point to the notion that in an attempt to understand those things, an understanding of how the subject and the contents of the study are always kind of like
it's always informed by things like things like the symptom, like
something external that is not apparent and yet is active in that we assume its kind of inherent reality.
Yeah, like we tend to have this idea that we are discrete individual subjects who have our own perception of the world, unmediated by social conditions or symbolic certain symbolic field, but that's obviously ridiculous. And yeah, that's like what Žižek is doing here, and it's like he's pointing out the interpretive mode of Freud and of Marx are very similar, for one thing,
mm-hmm.
and also like don't rely on a simple interpretation of things and ideas. That there's another category here where a formal category that is through those modes of thought is there's the attempt to access that formal mode of thinking, the abstract mode of thinking,
and the innovation. It's like that they provide is like it allows you to understand those other things by way of understanding.
Like Freud also said, likened his body of thought to Copernicus, the Copernican revolution, right? And what does something like the Copernican revolution do? Is it reformulates a given set of conditions in a completely different mode of interpretation.
Right. And that's why Žižek can piggyback on Lacan saying that it's a transition from feudalism to capitalism that allows for both. It basically allows for Marx to say that the world isn't that ideas aren't just created by the mind, they're also created by the hands.
Ah,
That there's a materiality.
Good point. Yeah.
really nice.
And then again, that materiality isn't mere material.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
So it's both are kind of inverted.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think that's it, folks. Any final remarks?
I heard a bird imitating a car alarm the other day. It was pretty cool.
Oh wow.
How'd it go?
It was like wee 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 wee. There's a starling. Starlings are imitators. Žižek and so on. Thanks for listening.
We're supposed to be talking to Agon Hamza soon. We'll see if that ever materializes. Until then, be well.
See you later.
Bye.
Oh, by the way, the Žižek and so on podcast stands united with the people of Ukraine. In case you were wondering.
Yeah.
Everyone has to assure everyone else that they're not on Russia's side. It's like no one cares, man. For one thing, it's like what you personally believe isn't really the point of this moment.
I find it very funny how people like in Halifax have like Ukrainian flags hanging like on their houses. It's like
Not true.
like who are you convincing here, right? Like what does this mean? Like that you need to represent this to the people who uniformly, as they walk by, agree with.
Thank you.